Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Vince Molinaro from the Leadership Contract, Inc. Welcome to this episode of the Lead the Future podcast. My guest today is Michelle DiEmanuele, who is the Secretary of Cabinet with the Ontario Public Service in Ontario, Canada. And Michelle has spent her career in broader public and private sectors, leading large-scale service change and cultural transformation initiatives. And she's held many roles across many ministries over her career. And she returned to the Ontario Public Service in 2021 to serve as Secretary of Cabinet. After spending more than a decade as President and CEO of Trillium Health Partners, she established the Institute for Better Health, led a voluntary hospital merger in Canada. This was the largest in Canada between Credit Valley Hospital and Trillium Health Centre. She's been recognized with many awards, including being inducted into Canada's top 100 most powerful women Hall of Fame and the top 40 under 40. She's also the recipient of the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal and the Order of Ontario. She holds an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from the Faculty of Community Services at Toronto Metropolitan University. She's a senior fellow at the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. And Michelle has served on both publicly traded and private boards. So I'm excited to have Michelle with us today. Welcome, Michelle, to the Lead the Future podcast. Really excited to have you with us.
Vince, I'm excited to be here. One of the things that I have a great passion for is leadership. And so over the years, you and I have had many conversations about the importance of leadership. So I'm really excited to be engaging in this with you today.
Well, let's dive right in because, your form of leadership is really anchored in leading a lot of large-scale transformations. And I'm really curious to kind of understand, what have you learned is critical for senior executives to pay attention to when they're, leading these significant changes?
So, it's a great question. And there's been so many books written about, the formula of how to lead change. But for me, it comes down to a couple of very simple truisms. When leading large, complex change, transformation, modernization, whichever word you wish to use, first and foremost, you've got to have a compelling reason to do it. People will talk about vision or mission or a willed future. But fundamentally, if you cannot describe why or how things will be better by changing or going through that transformation, I would virtually say it's almost impossible to be successful, because you have to create, as Ted Lasso would say, you've got to create belief.
Right.
And belief comes from actually having a sense that things can be better. And that's really mapped quite strongly with a set of value propositions where people will both believe in you and trust you. And so what do you value in that transformation as you lead that complex change? What matters? What are the principles? People can buy into that. But then it comes to actually demonstrating, the walk the talk, as they say, or in the case of the pace of change these days, run the talk.
Right.
The talk.
Yeah.
It's really important that you're able to demonstrate that those values are being lived through the process. And then it's all technical. Do you have a good communications capability? Do you have a really good assessment of the process changes you need to make, the structural changes that you need to make? With structure comes your favorite word, accountability. And how do you ensure the accountability structures and architectures are there? And, lastly, I would say, all this is only enabled by getting the right people around you and a diverse set of individuals around skill sets, leadership styles, thought processes, analytical capability. The right people around you with the right vision, mission, and set of belief around where you can be, coupled with values. Remember, those leaders will bring those values and those people will bring those values, will enable that technical work to be executed and implemented, with somewhat of a fairly precise and I think successful way.
Now, you referenced this earlier around the pace, right? So certainly current context, lots of change, the acceleration of the change, a lot of ambiguity, uncertainty that everyone is facing, whether you're in a public sector organization, private sector, or in society as a whole. As you look back at kind of large scale transformations that you led in the past and the ones you're undertaking today, what's fundamentally different because of the current context?
Well, the analogy I like to use is 20 years ago, 25 years ago, change had a kind of logic and a more linear path to it. And I sort of think about that concept of being in a canoe and you're kind of paddling away and you know where you want to get to and you've got some instrumentation to help you do that. Change today is like whitewater rafting. And it does have a lot more activity and athleticism when you think about whitewater rafting. And you also have to bring different instrumentation and even tie yourself off if you think about me continuing that analogy. And so today it really is about thinking in multi-dimensional execution. It's about a real team sport.
Yeah.
And that team of teams, as General McChrystal talks about, team of teams, and making sure because of the pace, it's inevitable you will make errors or have unintended consequences. I don't think you can be so planful when you're charting a course for a destination you've not been before that you won't have unintended consequences. It's making sure you have all of that apparatus around you to support that risk mitigation. And again, to use the whitewater rafting, whether it's tying people off, it's having the cup to get the water out of the boat if you take on a little too much as you head down. And even every once in a while, if somebody is really, really struggling, and they fall out of that raft, you got to pull them back in and help them, right?
Yeah.
So it is very different. And fundamental to that, though, is the multi-dimensional layer at the same time versus the linear approach to change.
Yeah. How do, what's your sense, someone is out of the raft, right? Because it does put managers and leaders, this kind of change under tremendous pressure.
Yeah.
And some, see that as an opportunity and rise to it, others struggle. How do you cope as you're managing this multidimensional aspects of change?
Well, you and I have, as we know, talked over the years about the importance of walking around and being really very, very connected to the levels of change that are occurring, and understanding where those pressure points are. And sometimes the only way to really internalize those pressure points, which create those unintended consequences, is an ability to use all of your senses. So as a leader, if you're just getting briefed on the scorecard, the dashboard, or the various tools, you're going to only use a few of your senses. You're going to obviously see it, you're going to hear it. But when you're walking around as that change is occurring, you're using all of your senses. And you're gathering intelligence that leads you to be able to look around a few corners to hopefully be able to predict where some of those risks will actually get materialized, and you'll be able to maybe just head it off a little bit, but also to understand where some of the load is being carried in the organization. And my experience has been that one of two things is typically true where the earliest moments of pressure and vulnerability occurs, which leads to all kinds of things around how individuals are feeling. It's either at the very top of the organizational chart where so much is occurring at the executive and management levels that there's this perception that, oh my God, everything's changing and everybody's feeling it. But the truth is, in my organization, that's a very smaller number than if I look at the entire organization. Or you've made some very specific change in a very important strategic unit where really only the unit is feeling it. And yet somehow the organization feels they're all taking it on. And so being able to distinguish that is critical. And I believe fundamentally that only occurs by being present throughout your organization during the change, engaging that leaders to have honest, direct, tough dialogue, very, very critical conversations about what isn't working, and looking at the data and the analytics and what it's telling you, including your employee data.
Yeah. That is something, in past conversations we've had, that's something that's always stuck with me that you shared around your deliberateness to go to the front lines, to talk to people, to use, as you say, use all your senses to gauge almost capacity and pacing, right? So that you can kind of come back and go, oh, I think we can keep going, or you know what, we need to pull back a little bit just to give people a chance to kind of get their breath, get comfortable with the new state, and then we move forward. And I think it's a subtlety, but it's such an important thing that I think a lot of managers and leaders sometimes miss, right? Around the complexities of change and the impact it has on human beings, because these are both can be exciting times, but also daunting and challenging times. In your own experience, what have you seen? What do managers and leaders often miss when they're leading complex change or leading a strategic shift on behalf of their organization?
I would say that for me is a very simple answer. I mean, there's so many parts of that I could delve into, but in the most simple way, when you think about change, you change structures, which are accountability pieces for me. You change people and who is in the organization, or you change process. And my experience has been vast majority of individuals declare victory because they've restructured, quote unquote, their organization.
Right.
The true organizations that change and fundamentally sustain change, they change process. And it's not as exciting maybe,
right,
but it is where the specialness happens. And so I would say the biggest mistake anybody makes, whether you're a frontline manager or you're a CEO in front of a boardroom table with your chair and the board, if you are not tackling tough core business process change, virtually most of the change you make will just get restructured in the same way, whether it's 3, 4, 5 years from now. And that's, an org change or, the key leaders change, et cetera. That is fundamentally the easiest kind of change to do. And that's why I would also say my other big advice would be, don't communicate so quickly about how successful you are. Because if you're communicating too much about the success, it probably means you're doing things that really aren't sustainable, true change initiatives. And so when you're doing process, that is hard to communicate. So you have to find other ways to create the excitement around the change or the restructuring or the transformation. But when you get to that moment where that flywheel kicks in and that process now really keeps returning dividends year after year after year, and you see that performance level go up, that's where you've made a difference. And often I would say, at least in the C-suite, you often have to look back, even sometimes after you've left the job, to see where that true sustainable paradigm shift has occurred.
Yeah, and I like the analogy of the flywheel, because it is that momentum, right? It takes a while to get there sometimes, but then when it starts happening, it's visceral. You can kind of feel it.
Yeah.
Everyone feels it, and then it's an amplifier. People want to go faster on some of the changes. So that's really, really helpful. So you talked about one of the critical things is building the team around you, and I know in the work that you have been doing within the OPS, there's been a focus on building a community of accountable leaders. What, in your perspective, why is that important, and what has been critical for you to pay attention to as you're surrounding yourself with these exceptional leaders to help you drive change and transformation?
So I came back during the kind of middle of COVID, and when you're really running an organization against one single objective, there's a simplicity to that, and there's an alignment that just naturally occurs. But as we come out of COVID, we really do move back into a very large, complex, multi-dimensional organization delivering hundreds of different businesses through we're almost 70,000 people, right? So what was evident to me is that, as that was occurring, the world was also changing. And this concept that you could actually do any one thing as a single entity, ministry in our case, and I would say when I ran other organizations as a single business line, to use private sector language, the ability to do that is very, very limited now.
Yeah.
That so much of a solution building requires that, as they say, horizontal thinking. And so for us to be able to achieve that, it really required us thinking differently. And so I'll just say, first and foremost, I think about the community of practice concept, it is a oneness.
Mm-hmm.
It's a oneness, right? And so when I go back to some of what I just said earlier about that sense of belief in a mission, that mission creates oneness. And so part of that was reestablishing our commitment to our why are we public servants?
Yeah.
Why do we serve? And as simple as that may seem, for a public service, you're never not going to be a public service. We are here to serve the over 16 million people in Ontario. That never will change. We're not going to be a company that may start in building refrigerators and end up in aerospace, right? So reaffirming our mission of service to others and the people of Ontario was key to that community building. Secondly, fundamental to that work, and you and I have talked a lot about the work that you have studied and presented, is there are elements to being a community that have to be present and have to have a discipline associated with them. Otherwise, you're just loosely coupled teams.
Right.
And so that concept of mission, that concept of accountability and what it means, the how you will create that excitement around the work you are doing tied to every layer of that organization so that when people come through the door, they know what they're here to do.
Yeah.
It relates to that. I talked about critical conversations. How do we hold each other accountable? To those who may be listening, to our CHROs or CEOs out there, in a large organization, no CEO can do it without deploying that leadership group across the organization, which means the consistency has to be there.
Yeah.
Community, if I can use a different analogy, community is citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
And so how you create the citizenship where we all know who we are, why we're here, what we're here to do, and know that through that citizenship, when those things may need to be calibrated, we do it together. No one person goes off on their own, because that sometimes can make you weaker, not stronger. And so when I think about coming back and I think about fundamentally having to deliver what we do differently in a more complex world where single entity solutions don't work, it requires us to think as a community, to understand their citizenship within that community, and to still operate as teams of teams
Right.
within that. It all gets wrapped up into fundamentally being one organization,
Yeah.
not multiple. And don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, Vince, I've studied culture a lot during the course of my career and led a lot of cultural change. It doesn't mean that you can't have subcultures.
Yeah.
I'm a Canadian. I live in Ontario.
Right.
We can have subcultures within the organization.
Yeah. But that sense of, as I write about, kind of a one company mindset, to use an overused term, if I had a nickel for every CEO I talk to who desperately realizes they need to create that in order for them to be successful for the exact same reason, right? It's a more horizontal view. It's more enterprise wide view. It's one where it's in response to organizations implementing more integrated strategies in order to serve the customers or the people that they serve, and so it requires that. I'm curious to get your take on leaders who naturally seem to have that ability and capability, because Gartner a few years back did some research on enterprise-wide leadership, and in that work found only about 12% of leaders generally are naturally inclined to lead that way. So you've got this sort of companies who desperately companies and organizations that desperately need it, but then the reality of we've got to help leaders kind of understand what it means to lead as one.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question. And, it comes back to something I said earlier, which is who you choose to lead matters.
Yeah.
You've often said choosing leadership it's a choice, right? You choose to lead. But for those who are in the processes of who they choose, whether it's through our HR work that we do, whether it's through the actual leader who is choosing, you actually have to understand what it is you're choosing for. And, we talk about competency-based models for choice, skill-based models for choice. You really do need to focus on the kinds of results people have achieved through others.
Yeah.
And so I'd start by saying we've infused this organization with new leadership while we are also building our current leadership capacity, because we need both. We need to have those who can lead by example. And so at the top of the organization, or the bottom, as I like to say, because the leaders have to actually serve everybody else. But at that deputy minister level, choosing leaders who have demonstrated capabilities to involve others and get results has been a core choice that I've made, and to do so within a variety of different sectors, not just internally. And then good performance management.
Right.
We've all been part of those conversations where we talk about the individual who gets great results, generally wonderful values, they're respectful, they're capable, all of those things. But you notice there's a lot of I in their performance document they give you, and not a lot of we.
Yeah.
And while that seems very simple, and you've heard it a million times, it's true. And so being able to have those performance conversations with, individuals who are doing really good work, but asking a very simple question: how have you enabled the others around you to be successful? What are you giving back?
Yeah. And that's ultimately, what great leaders do, right? It's otherwise, if it's all about them, they're simply individual contributors. So they're not leaders and managers really rallying people to come together to do great work together, for sure. So what have been some of the tangible benefits you've seen as you've started to really infuse this idea of sort of a one organization, one OPS, and the sense of a community of leaders? What have you seen has been some of the progress that you're pleased with?
So a couple of things, and these are some data points, and then I'll maybe I'll end with an anecdote or a couple of examples in a different way. So I would say, we have been very deliberate in our employee engagement, and, we've seen our engagement participation go up. That tells me we've got engagement at a level we didn't have. We have seen our progress on the areas that we have as leaders focused on, like recognition, some of our work on mental health, our work on workload and how to reduce workload, or how to spread our workload where others, and again, when you spread workload, that's creating a different dynamic in how we work together. We've just done a pulse check on some of this, and again, we're seeing all the numbers going up. But what I think was quite unique, certainly in my experience, this is something different that I've done than previous metrics around, your performance metrics, which by the way, our performance metrics are also going up around our key service indicators through Service Ontario. Our key service indicators are around our service delivery that we have around granting or transfer payments. All of those things are moving in the right direction. I'll just pause by reminding everybody, as we came out of COVID, I'm extremely proud that the Ontario government and the public service that supports it did not have a backlog management or backlog. Let me start that again. I'm very proud that the Ontario Public Service, as we came out of COVID, had managed its backlogs through COVID as we changed businesses. You didn't have a problem getting your birth certificate, your driver's license, your health card as we came out of COVID, as you did other governments and their instruments that they have, a passport, for example. And I give, I know how hard the federal government works, so that's not to be critical. It's just to state a fact, which we had managed that because of our community of practice. But what I've done differently, and this is where you've been very helpful in some of the work that you've done, which we have mirrored and adopted, is to actually measure community.
Right.
That is something I had never thought about doing. We had measured culture, but we hadn't measured leadership community. And so we started about 2 years ago on focusing on things like accountability, critical conversations, service orientation, the why we're here, our mission, all of those things that go into making up community. And, whether it's on, like in any one of those areas, whether it's on our accountability as a team, our oneness as a team, our creating excitement in this organization, on any one of those indicators, we've risen by either 8 to 20%. That's powerful.
That's remarkable. Yeah.
And
congrats.
And I say this all the time now. Well, there are many things we can learn from the private sector. And I've worked in the private sector, and I've worked in big multinational companies in the private sector. There's many things the private sector can learn from the Ontario Public Service. And one of the things that I think we've demonstrated is our ability to compete at the highest level, at the leadership level.
Yeah. That's awesome. Congrats on that accomplishment. So we're kind of winding down the discussion, and I couldn't have time with you without, I think, asking about your perceptions on what's been happening south of the border as it relates to all things Doge and sort of in many ways the work to really gut a lot of what's happening in the federal government section there. But I would love, as a passionate senior executive in the public sector, I'd love your lens on that if you care to share.
For sure. Well, first off, I'm going to start by saying the Ontario Public Service is the most efficient public service in Canada. We have 5 FTEs per 1,000 people in our population. Nobody can match that. Nobody. And we have grown very, very incrementally over the last decade, less than a percentage point each year per the last decade. So we're on the right track around good stewardship of taxpayer funds. Having said that, I think there's an important couple of messages about what's coming out of the US around the delivery of public services. Firstly, relevancy. Public services have to be relevant to those they serve.
Right.
And so I think for me as a leader in the public service, and I would say for any leader, if you're not relevant, then there is a reasonable question to be asked about why something is occurring.
Yeah.
And so I think what I see in the US is that real question of relevancy. And so we saw what happened. Then the question has to become, shouldn't every organization constantly be looking at how to be better, faster, more enabled, more responsive to those they serve, whether it's private or public? Of course they should. Mm-hmm. And I think that is another lesson coming up. Like, well, we may not appreciate, and certainly I wouldn't say that has been a very successful change management exercise. In fact, when you look at the data and it's still coming out, they've actually saved very little.
Right.
There's been a lot of disruption. And I'm not sure, against the backdrop of what I said earlier, that anybody has the belief that things are going to actually be better. Having said that, every public service and every organization has to always ask itself how it can do better with either the resources the public would give it through a government to spend on their behalf, or by shareholders
Right.
who invest in something and how that gets spent on their behalf. We should always be looking for ways to cut red tape, to streamline processes, to lean out work process that is inefficient or unneeded, to have the right skill sets in the organization to do the job well, and fundamentally to question the status quo and whether the status quo is creating a foundation for excellence in the future or a barrier to excellence in the future. And our fundamental value is about excellence in our delivery.
Yeah.
And so I, on a certain level, it's been an important exercise for me to watch and to be reinvigorated around the importance of what I've just said.
Yeah.
But certainly we're going to do it a lot better in terms of our attention to excellence and our attention to relevancy. And I think our numbers already prove we do a pretty good job as it is. But we've got more we can do.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a defining element of you as a leader, which has always been, what always inspires me is, your unrelenting high standards and ambition for what is possible, and rallying people to that, and that's really what you're talking about, right? Excellence is about achieving high standards in the outcomes and for the people that we are there to serve, whether they're customers or in your case, citizens of Ontario. So the standards and excellence is the starting point. Absolutely. So
Vince,
last question. Go ahead.
Vince, can I just add one
Yeah.
thing, if that's okay? Because I think we're at a very important inflection in history too. And what you just said is even more important than ever before. It's one thing to have high standards, and I believe everybody comes into their job each day wanting to do their best. But we're at an inflection point in this country. And every single day we lose not being better, we lose.
Right.
And so I want to underscore, it isn't just, excellence for the sake of it. We are in a really important moment in this country and in this province. And we are fighting on several fronts, as we know, with respect to the economy and what's going on. And so I just want to say there's never been a more important time for us to, A, collectively help each other to do that, and B, to constantly ask ourselves, and especially in one of those moments where we might be the most tired, because we've just come through something, what more can we do to push through again? Because we may not get this moment back to nation build in the way we can, but also we may not get this moment back and somebody may fill that void for us in terms of productivity or economic viability.
Awesome. My sense is that is a great way to close this conversation. Very inspirational as always. So thank you, Michelle, for making time and spending some time on the Lead the Future podcast, and really appreciate the generosity of thought and spirit that you brought to the conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Vince. I really appreciate the time.